The intercom echoed through the quiet cabin. "Would the passenger in seat 2A please stand? There has been a booking error." In that moment, Julian Mercer, 44, a brilliant neuroscientist turned CEO of EtherMed Technologies, froze. He was sitting in seat 2A. The atmosphere in first class turned to stone. White passengers turned their heads, eyes flickering with indifference, curiosity, and a faint, unspoken amusement. Standing before Julian was Chief Flight Attendant Sabine Richter, her posture rigid, her smile tight and empty. "Sir, it appears this seat belongs to someone else." Her voice was cold as steel. Julian calmly handed over his ticket, along with the confirmation email glowing clearly on his phone. Everything was valid. Yet Sabine's expression did not change. To her, he was not a first-class passenger, only someone out of place. He drew a deep breath. He had grown used to such looks, from classrooms at university to boardrooms in Silicon Valley. But this time, before so many eyes, 30,000 feet above ground, he was being forced to stand. Then Oliver Grant, a 52-year-old white businessman in a disheveled suit, appeared 20 minutes late. Instantly, Sabine bowed her head. "Welcome, Mr. Grant." Her tone was silk, deferential and smooth. The realization hit Julian like a flash. Seat 2A had always been reserved for Grant. This flight was no accident. He rose, gathering his bag with movements calm to the point of ice. Inside, though, humiliation burned through his veins. The fake smiles, the deliberate coughs, the avoided stares. They were all knives. Only one pair of eyes watched silently. Lila Park, 39, a Stanford sociology professor. When Sabine stressed the words comfortable in economy, Lila's hand tightened around her phone. She pressed record, her heart pounding. She knew she was capturing not just an incident, but evidence of a broken system. Julian heard Sabine's final words clearly. "Perhaps economy would suit you better." One sentence that carried generations of contempt and pain. The economy cabin was cramped, the seats narrow. The cries of children and the smell of reheated meals filling the air. Julian sat down, his broad shoulders hunched, carrying the weight of humiliation. Beside him, Lila whispered, "What they did to you cannot be left in silence." Julian turned slightly. She showed no pity. In her eyes burned determination, the look of someone who had lived through similar cuts. "We call it systemic coded language," Lila explained, her voice tight but firm. "The kind of language never written in a training manual, but everywhere in practice." Julian closed his eyes, his life flashing back. From the South Side streets of Chicago, through Johns Hopkins, to founding EtherMed. A lifetime fighting against bias, only to be sitting here now, the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, fresh from closing a $500 million deal in Japan, and still being treated as though he did not belong in first class. The engines roared and the plane lifted into the night. But within Julian, a storm was rising. Quietly, he said to Lila, "I'll file a complaint, at least to make them admit they were wrong." Lila shook her head. "Complaints vanish into black holes. You'll need more than that." Her words cut like a blade through his restraint. In that instant, Julian understood. This was not about a seat. It was a challenge to his very life's work. High above, in the darkness of the sky, a man had been forced into economy. What no one realized was that the man they dismissed was powerful enough to bring down an entire airline. Julian Mercer gripped the armrest, the sting of shame hardening into a vow. They would pay. Not just for him, but for everyone who had ever been pushed out of their rightful seat in life. The next morning, as the pale sunlight lingered over the glass towers of San Francisco, Julian's phone vibrated endlessly. The screen was flooded with notifications, thousands of shares, millions of views. The video of him being forced out of his first-class seat had erupted like wildfire in a dry forest. The one who posted it was Lila Park. Her caption was short, but it pierced through the airline's hollow defenses like a blade. This was not a mistake. This was exclusion. On social media, hashtags surged to the top. Hashtag flying while black. Hashtag justice for Julian. Hashtag end airline bias. Outrage spread across the internet. A pioneering CEO in medical technology, a man who had saved thousands of lives with advanced neural innovations, had been humiliated for nothing more than the color of his skin. At the headquarters of EtherMed Technologies, the communications team scrambled. CFO Victoria Hang called frantically. "Julian, you need to do something. The press won't stop calling. CNN, BBC, even NHK from Japan wants an interview. We just signed a $500 million deal, and now everyone is rallying behind you. This could be a golden opportunity to elevate our brand." But Julian did not answer immediately. He looked in the mirror and saw the dark circles under his eyes, the heavy face not of a victorious CEO, but of a man publicly humiliated in the skies. "Victoria, this is not a marketing campaign. This is about dignity. I will not turn pain into a tool for sales." Meanwhile, at Euronova Airways headquarters, an emergency meeting was called. CEO Edward Langford slammed the table, his voice sharp with fury. "We need to control the narrative. Release a statement immediately. This was just a system error. We regret the incident. Emphasize that the passenger failed to comply with crew instructions. Understood?" PR executives nodded quickly. None of them realized the cameras had already captured everything, and their strategy would turn a drop of oil into a raging fire. Within an hour, the statement was online, cold and detached. "Euronova Airways values our customers. We regret the misunderstanding that occurred. However, passengers are obligated to follow crew instructions." Comments poured in. "You call this a misunderstanding? There's clear video evidence, and you still blame the passenger. This is blatant racism, and they're trying to cover it up." Images of flight attendant Sabine Richter's mocking smile, highlighted with red arrows and circles, spread across Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Julian sat in the storm of public outrage, his phone buzzing non-stop. Messages flooded in from friends, colleagues, even former patients. "We stand with you. Do not let them bury the truth. You represent all of us." In the quiet of night, he opened his laptop, replaying the video over and over. Each time he heard the words, "Economy might be more comfortable for you," the pain struck again. But now his eyes no longer held patience. They burned with resolve. Across the city, Lila Park was on a video call with students and colleagues. Her voice was steady. "This is not just Julian Mercer's story. This is systemic discrimination. And if we remain silent, tomorrow there will be thousands more Julians. By the end of the day, Julian received an unexpected call. A deep, gravelly voice spoke on the other end. "Mr. Mercer, we have an offer. $50,000 and a confidentiality clause. You will never speak of this again. In return, everything will disappear." Julian sat silent for a few seconds, then burst out in a dry laugh. It was not laughter of joy, but of contempt. "You have just made your greatest mistake. I don't want money. I want justice." In that moment, he chose the dangerous path. But it was also the path that would expose the face of an entire system. 3 days later, while public outrage over the video was still burning hot, a new wave of information suddenly surfaced, and this time it targeted Julian Mercer directly. Tabloids notorious for sensationalism released explosive headlines. "Arrogant CEO drunk on flight." "Insider sources claim Mercer abused power to demand first-class seat." On television, anonymous witnesses claimed Julian had shouted at the crew, that he had uttered the infamous line, "Do you know who I am?" Julian was stunned as he watched himself twisted in the eyes of the public. These fabrications erased the truth of the original video. In the EtherMed boardroom, the atmosphere was taut as wire. Lawrence Chen, a board member, tapped his fingers against the table. "We just closed a $500 million deal with Japan, but they are calling me, asking if Mercer was the one causing trouble on that flight. They're afraid this company is unstable." Another voice broke in. Patrick Sloan, COO, once Julian's closest friend. "Julian, I understand your anger, but maybe it's best to let this go. Don't drag the company into a pointless battle. Euronova is too big. They can crush anyone." Julian looked at Sloan, doubt flickering in his eyes. His longtime ally was now urging him to walk away. The media attacks kept coming. Articles asked, "Is Mercer playing the race card? Is he exploiting the incident for attention?" Beneath each article, comments flooded in, some defending him, others mocking. At home, Renee, his wife, gripped his hand tightly as she watched the news. "They are trying to make you the guilty one. If you stay silent, they win. But if you keep fighting, our whole family will be dragged into the fire." Julian brushed her hair back gently, his eyes resolute. "I am not fighting for myself. I am fighting for those who never had the chance to fight back." Amid the storm, an unexpected ally stepped forward. Lila Park revealed her identity and spoke in a televised interview. "I recorded the video. I saw it with my own eyes. Mr. Mercer remained calm until the very end. Anyone saying otherwise is lying." But only hours later, Lila received an email from Stanford's administration. "We are concerned about your social media activity. It may affect the reputation of the university." She understood immediately. The invisible hand of Euronova and its parent company, Atlas Trans Holdings, had reached her. That night, as Julian sat alone in his office, his phone rang. On the other end was a trembling male voice. "I'm Gabriel Ortiz, a Euronova flight attendant. Not all of us agreed with how you were treated. I have information you need to know. But we must meet in person. Here, no one is safe." Julian's heart pounded. At last, a crack had appeared in the impenetrable wall of Euronova. What he did not yet know was that in the shadows, A larger campaign had already been set in motion, and the man orchestrating it was Maxwell Dorian, CEO of Atlas Trans, a man who had carried a personal grudge against Julian for years. This battle was no longer about a seat on a plane. It was a deadly game of chess, where Julian's honor, his career, and his very life would be tested to the limit. A small cafe tucked away in a San Francisco alley glowed under dim yellow lights, the sound of spoons stirring in glass cups blending with an old jazz tune. Julian Mercer sat in a corner, his dark coat collar pulled high, slowly turning a cold espresso in his hands. He was not a man easily shaken. He had spent countless hours in operating rooms with lives hanging in the balance. But tonight, his heart was restless. The glass door creaked open, and a weary-looking man stepped inside. His airline uniform had been replaced by a wrinkled shirt, but the worry in his eyes was unmistakable. Gabriel Ortiz, 38, 15 years in the skies, walked toward Julian's table. "Mr. Mercer?" he whispered, his eyes darting around the cafe. Julian nodded. Ortiz sat down, his fingers clasped tightly, trembling. "I only have a few minutes, if they find out I came." Julian looked straight at him. "You can trust me. What you share won't be wasted." Ortiz exhaled, pulled a thick envelope from his pocket, and set it on the table. "This is a copy. Internal Euronova documents. They call it the Passenger Comfort Initiative." Julian touched the envelope lightly, his pulse quickening. Ortiz continued, each word heavy. "It's a policy never written with explicit racist language, but we all understand what it means. To ensure the first-class cabin remains friendly to core passengers, that is, keeping it majority white, at any cost." Julian sat still, the words striking his mind like a gavel. "The crew is trained on how to handle situations," Ortiz said, lowering his eyes. "If a person of color shows up, we find a reason. Booking errors, system glitches, upgrades for someone else. If we succeed, we earn points. Points that directly affect year-end bonuses." Julian leaned back, his fingers tapping the table. All his years of fighting to prove his worth, and here was proof of a cold, calculated machine designed to push people like him aside. Ortiz leaned closer, his voice barely more than a breath. "I've seen colleagues reprimanded for failing to adjust the cabin. Some even lost their jobs. Those who followed the system were rewarded, promoted. That's the unspoken law." Julian asked quietly, "Why are you helping me? You know the risk." Ortiz's eyes reddened. "Because I can't take it anymore. I'm Latino. For years I stayed silent, thinking I had no choice. But that day, watching how they treated you, I saw myself. If I stay silent any longer, I stop being human." His words cut through like a blade, tearing away the last veil. Julian gripped the envelope. Inside was the key to exposing the truth. That night, back home, Julian opened it. Memos, internal emails between Euronova managers, statistical charts breaking down first, class demographics by race. The numbers were chilling. Passengers of color were 20, 7 times more likely to be downgraded than white passengers. Each page, each line of text was a strike against the public image of an airline that boasted of its commitment to equality. Renee stepped into the room and saw her husband hunched over the pile of papers. "Julian, you have to be careful. This isn't just about exposing the truth anymore. This is a war against an empire." He looked up, eyes hard with resolve. "I know. But if I don't fight, I'll live the rest of my life carrying the shame of that old day. And our children will inherit the same rotten system." The next day, at Stanford, Lila Park received a strange call. A sharp female voice spoke. "Professor Park, if you don't take down that video and stop speaking publicly, the university may have to reconsider your position. Is your career really worth the risk?" Lila froze for a moment, then answered steadily. "If I must choose between my career and what is right, I know what I choose." Hanging up, her hands trembled. But deep inside, the fire burned brighter. That evening, Julian, Renee, and Lila gathered in a small, discreet room, yellow lamplight falling over tense faces. Julian spread Ortiz's documents across the table. "This is the truth they fear most," he said, his voice low and resonant. "This is not just about me. This is a system built to exclude anyone who doesn't fit their image." Lila nodded, her eyes blazing. "We will not let this disappear into some complaint drawer. We'll bring it to the light. But Julian, be ready. Once you go public, they will strike back. They'll smear you, maybe even try to destroy you." Julian gave a faint smile. "They've already begun. But this time, I have proof. And I have both of you." Outside, the San Francisco night lay quiet. But inside that small room, a silent battle had been set in motion. People once dismissed were now standing together, preparing to face a corporate giant. And Julian knew that from this moment, he was no longer fighting just for himself. He was writing a new chapter of history, one where truth could not be bought off by secret contracts. The morning sky was heavy, grey clouds swirling above San Francisco like an omen. Julian had just set his coffee cup on his desk when the phone rang relentlessly. On the other end was Victoria Hang, CFO of EtherMed, her voice panicked. "Julian, the IRS has just announced a full audit of 7 years of company records. This cannot be a coincidence. We volunteered for a review just last year, and everything was clean. This is a deliberate attack." Julian's heart sank. He knew immediately whose hand was at work. It was not just Euronova, but Atlas Trans Holdings, their powerful parent company, and its CEO Maxwell Dorian, who had officially launched a counterstrike. Less than an hour later, another email arrived from the California Medical Board. Julian's license to practice medicine was placed under review due to a flood of anonymous complaints alleging surgical errors in the past. Procedures he had performed at Johns Hopkins nearly a decade ago were now being twisted into evidence against him. Renee, Julian's wife, slammed the papers onto the table, fury in her eyes. "This is vile! You left the operating room years ago. How can they weaponize the past against you?" Julian sat in silence, his hands clenched. He was no stranger to harsh battles, but he had never seen the monsters in the shadows play this dirty. The days that followed were a storm. The Mercer family's home address was leaked online. Strangers drove slowly past their house, lingering long enough to spread fear. The home phone rang at midnight, nothing but heavy breathing on the line before it clicked dead. 16-year-old Caleb came home pale, throwing his backpack on the floor. They called me the fraud's son. They laughed at the video, said Dad deserved to be kicked out of first class. What am I supposed to do, Dad? 13-year-old Maya could only sit in her room crying, trembling as she scrolled through mocking photos of their family on social media. Renee held her children, tears streaming down her face. Julian sat still, feeling the fire burn inside. He swore he would never allow that humiliation to fall on his family. At the company, things were no better. EtherMed's stock dropped 18% in a single day. Investors who once praised Julian as a savior of medical technology now pulled away, calling the board with sharp questions. In an emergency meeting, board member Lawrence Chen looked Julian straight in the eye. "We must think of the shareholders. Perhaps you should consider stepping aside for now. When the storm passes, you can return." Julian pressed his lips tight. "You mean sacrifice my honor to save the stock price?" Chen remained silent. That silence spoke louder than words. But the deepest wound came when Julian turned to Patrick Sloan, COO, and his closest friend for 15 years. Sloan sat with his arms crossed, offering not a single word in his defense. His silence cut like a blade in Julian's back. That night, when the house was finally quiet, a package arrived by courier. Inside was a USB drive and a note scrawled in haste. "Stop or lose everything." Julian plugged it in. The screen filled with candid photos of his family, Maya at an orthodontist appointment, Caleb playing basketball at school, Renee driving to work. Every detail of their private lives had been stalked. Renee stood behind him, trembling. "Julian, they're targeting the children." He turned, pulled her into his arms, his voice hoarse. "I swear, in this moment, they made their fatal mistake. Come after me. I can endure. But dare to touch my family, and this becomes a fight to the death." In the darkness, Julian Mercer knew the battle had entered its most brutal stage. Euronova and Atlas were not just trying to silence him. They wanted to destroy him completely, his career, his honor, and everything he loved. And in the heart of the storm, he saw only one choice left: to fight to the very end. Rain lashed against the streets of San Francisco, streetlights reflecting off puddles like shattered mirrors. In his silent office, Julian Mercer sat before the glow of his computer screen, eyes fixed on financial records. Every number appeared flawless, but he knew someone had opened the back door for the enemy. The phone rang. A security officer's voice came low and urgent. "Mr. Mercer, the office cameras show someone accessed the data vault after hours. No one is authorized, except COO Patrick Sloan." Julian's heart sank. Sloan, the man who had stood by his side for 15 years, since EtherMed was nothing more than a rented lab, was the one who had touched the heart of the system. The following night, Julian set a trap. In a private conversation with Renee, he deliberately mentioned a backup copy of the evidence, hidden at their lakeside cabin in Tahoe. His words were spoken just loud enough for the hidden microphones in his home to catch. Then he and his family left the city, feigning a vacation. In the still darkness, Julian's private security team lay in wait around the small wooden cabin. At exactly 2 a.m, the alarm hummed softly. A shadow in a dark coat slipped in, unlocking the door and moving straight to the study as if every corner was familiar. When the decoy safe was pried open, flashlights flared. The guards rushed in, pinning the intruder to the damp wooden floor. And as the mask was ripped away, Julian froze. Patrick Sloane. Sloane looked up, his face still composed, but his eyes betrayed fear. "Patrick," Julian's voice cracked. "Why?" Sloane swallowed hard before the words tumbled out. "You don't understand. They're too powerful. Atlas controls everything. Judges, politicians, the press. Maxwell Dorian promised me the CEO seat after they take over Ether Med. All I had to do was feed them information from inside." Julian felt his blood turn to ice. The family birthdays, the long nights in the office, the times Sloane had stood beside him in boardrooms. Suddenly it was all a stage, and he had believed in a lie. "So the plane incident?" Julian asked softly, as though punishing himself with the answer. Sloane lowered his head and whispered, "They knew your itinerary, your seat. Oliver Grant was planted. It was all staged, the opening move to bring you down." The confession struck like thunder in the night. Julian sat motionless, fury and heartbreak entwined like twin flames. A man he had treated like a brother was the one who had led the wolves to his door. Sloane lifted his gaze, attempting justification. "You can't win, Julian. They'll crush you. I chose survival." Julian shook his head slowly. "No, Patrick. You chose betrayal." He signaled for the guards to take Sloane away, but before the door slammed shut, Sloane spat out one final line, part warning, part curse. "You have no idea what you're up against. Atlas doesn't just want your company. They want to bury your very name." When the cabin was silent once more, rain hammering the roof, Julian sat alone, eyes closed. Inside him, fury rose with a resolve as hard as steel. The traitor had revealed himself, and there was no turning back. From that moment, Julian Mercer was no longer fighting just a corporation. He was standing against an entire rotten system, built on blood, silence, and men like Patrick Sloane. The sky over San Francisco hung heavy with leaden clouds, weak sunlight glinting off the cold glass towers. Inside Ether Med's secure boardroom, Julian Mercer stood before a massive screen where dozens of investors and shareholders were connected online. His face was gaunt from sleepless nights, but his eyes burned with defiance. He opened a thick folder, his voice steady and resonant. "What I am about to share is not just about me. This is proof of a systemic policy. The Passenger Comfort Initiative, implemented by Euronova Airways and its parent company Atlas Trans, to remove passengers of color from first class. This is not a mistake. It is organized discrimination, with rewards and punishments built into it." Charts filled the screen. Statistics showing passengers of color were 27 times more likely to be downgraded than white passengers. Internal emails praising crew for keeping the cabin harmonious. Some shareholders covered their mouths in shock. Others frowned, whispers buzzing through crackling microphones. Julian pressed on, each word like a blade. "They thought I would stay silent. They targeted our company, smeared my name, even threatened my family. But I will not retreat. If Atlas can do this to me, they can do it to anyone." In that moment, Julian was no longer simply a CEO. He was a witness, standing in a court of justice, daring to confront an empire. Outside the boardroom, a storm was already raging. As soon as the presentation ended, major media outlets launched conflicting stories. The evening news on a national channel opened with a chilling commentary. Is Julian Mercer playing the race card to hide financial scandals? Sources suggest Ethermed may be facing a liquidity crisis. On social media, anonymous accounts flooded the feeds with doctored images of Julian in an expensive suit standing before piles of dirty money. A spliced video twisted his words from "I'll be filing a complaint" into "I'll get everyone fired." Public opinion split sharply. Supporters roared in outrage, while skeptics sneered with derision. That night, as Julian stepped out of headquarters, a small truck suddenly swerved onto the sidewalk. He leapt aside just in time, the vehicle skimming past within inches before disappearing into traffic, leaving only the stench of burnt rubber. A bodyguard rushed over, face pale. "Mr. Mercer, that was no accident. They've moved from media warfare to real violence." Julian clenched his fists. He knew the mastermind could only be Maxwell Dorian, and the fortress of Atlas Trans would not rest until he was destroyed. At home, Renee watched their 2 children cling to each other in fear before the television. A news anchor claimed Julian was linked to financial misconduct. Caleb, furious, hurled the remote to the floor. Maya burst into tears. Dad didn't do anything wrong. Why are they lying like this? Renee wrapped her arms around them and whispered, "Because they fear the truth. And when power trembles, it becomes its most ruthless." Julian convened an emergency meeting with Lila Park and attorney Ava Sinclair. Lila spread new documents across the table, gathered from former Euronova employees. "We have more victims willing to step forward. But Julian, you must be ready. They won't just smear you, they'll try to destroy every single person who stands with you." Julian answered firmly, his voice unwavering. "Then let them know. This time we don't fight alone. They have money, they have power. But we have the truth." Late that night, as the city quieted, Julian sat by the window, staring at the distant lights. In his heart burned 2 fires, the pain of seeing his family dragged into the storm, and the unshakable resolve to defend the truth. He knew that from the moment he exposed the evidence, he had crossed a line with no return. On the other side lay a brutal war of dirty media, covert violence, and traitors yet to reveal themselves. Julian Mercer drew a long breath. In the darkness, he swore, "They may shake the skies themselves, but they will never extinguish this flame." The Capitol glowed under the October morning sun, its heavy wooden doors opening to admit the flood of people streaming into the hearing chamber. Cameras broadcast live. Hundreds of journalists crowded shoulder to shoulder, shutters clicking in relentless bursts. The air was thick, taut as a drawn bowstring. Today, America would witness a clash between a man humiliated on an airplane and the corporate giants that sought to dominate the economy. Julian Mercer entered, tall and lean, yet proud. A dark suit, a simple tie, eyes burning with resolve. At his side walked Professor Lila Park, hair tied neatly, arms full of thick documents, and attorney Ava Sinclair, her face cold and sharp, a woman who had destroyed corporate behemoths in court before. Behind them, the chamber was packed with the public, including businessmen, artists and diplomats, all victims of Euronova. Across the aisle, Isabel Hart, Vice President of Euronova, sat upright, her smile rehearsed 100 times in the mirror. At her side, a team of grey-suited lawyers whispered quietly. On the table lay binders stamped with the Atlas Trans Holdings logo, a silent reminder that the giant still stood behind them. Senator Robert Caldwell struck his gavel, his voice ringing across the chamber. "We convene today to investigate systemic discrimination in the airline industry and its financial backers. No one stands above the law. Mr. Mercer, you may speak." Julian rose. His voice was low and deliberate, yet it carried across the room. What happened on Euronova's flight was not an accident. It was policy. Policy disguised under words like comfort and customer experience. But in truth, it is a system of exclusion. He presented Ortiz's documents, internal charts, emails, statistics. Every number, every phrase struck like a blade at the wall of lies. Cameras turned to the audience where victims nodded, some wiping away tears. Julian paused, drawing a deep breath. They did not just push me out of first class. They tried to demean an entire community. And when I refused to be silent, they attacked my company, slandered my name, even tried to kill me. This is no longer personal. This is systemic conspiracy. A murmur rippled across the chamber. Isabel Hart immediately stood, her voice soft but scripted. Euronova deeply regrets Mr. Mercer's inconvenience. But this was only a system error, not a policy. We have dismissed the individuals involved. Our airline is committed to equality and diversity. Ava Sinclair let out a cold laugh. She stood and laid before the committee a stack of printed emails, directives signed by Euronova's own board, rewarding crews for managing passenger composition. A screenshot filled the large display. Isabel Hart herself had signed the approval. The chamber exploded in noise. Isabel's face blanched, her hands trembling as she struggled to hold her smile. Then came Gabriel Ortiz. He stepped to the stand, his hand still bandaged after a near-fatal accident. His voice shook but held steady. "I am a witness. I wore this uniform for 15 years. I was rewarded points for adjusting the cabin. I once bowed my head and accepted it, but after seeing what they did to Mr. Mercer, I could not stay silent. I recorded, I submitted evidence to the Department of Justice, and I know they are willing to kill me to bury the truth." The chamber fell silent. The image of a humble flight attendant, risking his career and his life, left everyone breathless. Next was Oliver Grant, the investor who had taken Julian's seat. He wore an expensive suit, sweat beading on his brow. When questioned about his ties to Atlas Trans, he stammered, "I was just a passenger by coincidence." Ava Sinclair shot up, presenting a string of emails. "Oliver, Seat 2A is prepared. The incident will be staged as planned." The chamber erupted again. Oliver stuttered, cornered, no longer able to deny. The climax came when Ava revealed the final piece. An email from Maxwell Dorian himself, CEO of Atlas Trans, addressed to his executives. On the large screen, the words blazed cold. "We must teach Mercer a lesson. He must understand people like him have no place at this table." A wave of outrage swept through the chamber. Senators whispered to one another, some unable to hide their shock. Cameras zoomed in on Julian's face, tired, wounded, yet his eyes shone with iron determination. As the gavel struck to close the hearing, Senator Caldwell declared firmly, "What we heard today is not just the humiliation of one man. It is a wake-up call for a nation. We will open a full federal investigation." Outside the Capitol, crowds erupted in cheers. Placards rose high. "Justice for Julian. End systemic racism." That night, Julian returned home and gazed at his children sleeping peacefully. He whispered, "I have begun to reclaim justice, but the real battle has only just begun." His eyes drifted to the window, where the lights of Washington still burned bright. Somewhere in the shadows, Maxwell Dorian remained hidden. Julian knew the true war was still ahead, where money, power, and even blood could be spilled. Late at night in Washington, fine rain fell against the glass roof of the hotel, where Julian and his family stayed under heavy security. After the hearing, he thought he had regained the upper hand. But when his phone lit up, his chest tightened. An anonymous message appeared, along with a photo of his children leaving school. The short words cut like a blade. "This time it's only surveillance. Next time it won't be so gentle." Renee saw it, her lips pale. "Julian, they've crossed every line. We have no more time." Julian gripped her hand tightly, his voice hoarse. "At this moment, I know they made their fatal mistake. Come after me. I can take it. But threaten our children. They've declared war." In the darkness, Maxwell Dorian sat in Atlas Trans's skyscraper office, a glass of red wine swirling in his hand. Dim light reflected off his icy face, eyes brimming with hatred. On the screen before him, he watched the latest doctored clip of Julian slamming his fist, shouting at employees, fabricated to portray him as a tyrant. "We will break him in ways he cannot imagine," Dorian told his inner circle. "If the law won't bring him down, public opinion will. If public opinion won't, violence will." At his side, Patrick Sloan, now openly turned traitor, nodded silently. Bought with promises of a throne, he had become the dagger hidden in Julian's back. The next day, Ethermed shook under assault. Police stormed the office with a search warrant for suspected money laundering. Employees stared in confusion as servers were dismantled and documents seized. The press exploded with headlines. "Mercer's company faces serious financial allegations." Amid the chaos, CFO Victoria Hang rushed to Julian, her face ashen. "Julian, I swear our records are clean. This is staged. They want to crush us from the inside out." Julian nodded, his voice resolute. "The harder they press, the stronger we stand. Let them see Ethermed will not break under their filth." That evening, horror struck. As Julian left the building, a black SUV swerved to block his path. 4 men in dark clothing leapt out, surrounding him. One pressed a gun to his back and growled, "This is your last chance. Step down, sign over the company, or bury your family." In that taut, breathless moment, Julian spun around, eyes blazing. "I'd rather die than let you touch my wife and children." Sirens wailed, red and blue lights slashing through the night. The attackers bolted, vanishing into the chaos. Julian stood frozen, cold sweat running down his temple. He knew now. This was no longer a war of law or media. This was life and death. At the same time, Lila Park was targeted. Her home was broken into, research files stolen. Her university received pressure from donors, demanding she suspend her teaching. But in her eyes, fear had turned to fire. If I retreat, what lesson will thousands of students learn? That power can buy the truth. She sent Julian an email. I'm still here. They cannot silence us. In a secure apartment, Julian met with Ava Sinclair, Lila Park, and Gabriel Ortiz. The table was stacked with documents, recordings, and hidden video evidence Ortiz had gathered. Ava spoke firmly. We have enough proof to make Dorian and Atlas federal criminals, but we must strike at the right time, the right place. If we release it now, they'll bury it, forge counter evidence, and crush us. We need one decisive blow. Julian looked around the room, his eyes hard as steel. Fine. They want war. Then we'll drag this war into the light. No shadows left for them to hide in. Outside the window, rain still fell, city lights flickering in the mist. Within Julian's heart, a truth had crystallized. He had lost a friend, been betrayed, had his life threatened. But all of it had forged his resolve into iron. This fight was no longer about reclaiming a first-class seat. It was about breaking the invisible chains that had bound generations. Julian Mercer closed his eyes, whispering like a vow. Dorian, you have an empire, but I have the truth, and the truth will burn everything you built on lies. Dawn settled over Washington, casting a pale golden glow across the Capitol dome. But for Julian Mercer, it was not the light of peace, it was the light of reckoning. After months of slander, pursuit, and betrayal, he was ready to strike the final blow. In the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel, hundreds of journalists, investors, and federal representatives pressed together. Cameras broadcast live as Julian stepped to the podium. He was thinner than before, but his eyes burned like molten steel. He began slowly, his voice echoing through the silence. Ladies and gentlemen, today I do not speak only for myself. I speak for the thousands who have been demeaned, excluded, and forced into silence. He held up a USB drive and plugged it into the projector. Behind him, the screen flared to life with an email from Atlas Trans, signed by Maxwell Dorian himself. Bring Mercer down. He must know that people like him have no place at this table. Next came Euronova's internal charts. Statistics showing passengers of color were 27 times more likely to be reassigned. Then Ortiz's hidden video played, capturing a manager instructing crew members to keep first class balanced. The room erupted with noise, reporters scribbling furiously. Julian's voice rose, strong and unflinching. They turned prejudice into a business tool. They sabotaged my company, threatened my family, nearly stole my life. But today, I prove this. The truth is stronger than any empire. At the same time, Ava Sinclair unveiled a case file delivered directly to the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission. Lila Park launched the # Existing While Black campaign, millions sharing their stories and turning the press conference into a global flashpoint. Gabriel Ortiz stepped into the spotlight, his arm still in a brace, but his voice steady. We are not afraid anymore. Across the city, Maxwell Dorian watched the broadcast from Atlas's glass tower. As piece after piece of evidence surfaced, his face drained of color. Phones rang non-stop, shareholders fleeing, clients cancelling, lawyers warning of impending federal subpoenas. In a fury, Dorian hurled his glass of wine against the wall. But he knew. The empire he built was collapsing beyond repair. That afternoon, Atlas Trans stock plummeted 42%. Euronova Airways declared bankruptcy, its entire leadership placed under federal investigation. News tickers blazed across screens. Maxwell Dorian faces charges of fraud, discrimination, and organized crime. Julian returned home. In the living room, Renee wrapped her arms around him, tears streaming down her face. Caleb and Maya looked at their father with awe and relief. He sat down, his voice breaking but warm. We survived, and we prevailed, not with money, not with violence, but with the truth. Outside the window, the skies cleared to blue. Julian knew the fight against discrimination was far from over. But today, an empire had fallen, and millions had seen that silence was not the only choice. When the plane lifted him toward New York for the next hearing, a flight attendant greeted him with a radiant smile. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Mercer. We are honored to have you on this flight." Julian nodded gently, smiling back. He did not need honor for himself. What he needed was justice for everyone who had ever been pushed out of first class. And this time, he believed, the world had begun to change. In the cold world of business, where profit often overshadows what is right, the story of Julian Mercer reminds us that dignity must never be bargained away. A first-class seat stolen from him became the spark that exposed an entire system of discrimination, and from personal humiliation, Julian turned it into the fire that reshaped an entire industry. The lesson here is clear. When we remain silent, injustice continues. But when one person dares to stand up, the truth can become the most powerful weapon. Julian did not only reclaim justice for himself, he opened a path for millions of others to follow. If you believe that justice and respect must always be defended, press like to spread this message, hit subscribe so you won't miss the next dramatic stories, and leave a comment with just one word: courage, to affirm that you too stand on the side of what is right.